You're listening to the When Life Hands You Lemons podcast.
But in an entry-level film production, it's one strike and you're out. You're fired. I'm not calling you back.
If your goal today is to make a basket, we're gonna make that basket.
The minute you create something, as soon as it's made tangible, you have a copyright in it.
How do I get our guys to sound that big, that full when they do the harmonies?
And I'm your host, Lennon Seahawk. Let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lemons. I am very excited to share my conversation with Jason Grishkoff with you this week. Jason is the founder and CEO of Indie Shuffle and a new platform called SubmitHub. And if you're in the music industry, specifically electronic music industry, you have probably heard of or used SubmitHub. And it's basically a platform where label managers, artists, publishers, managers, etc. can submit their music to social media influencers, bloggers, playlist curators, and more. And it's basically eliminated the need for emails. I use it for the blog that I run, and I completely shifted away from email pitches because everything is super easy right in SubmitHub. So Jason and I talk about his story, and we talk about how he worked at a consulting company, and then he got hired at Google, and he reported directly to the CEOs of Google, and he started doing music full time. He started doing Indie Shuffle full time, and then he started up SubmitHub, which is interesting because he learned to code and built it entirely on his own and continues to do so to this day. So in this episode, we talk about all kinds of stuff. And some of the most interesting things, or some of my favorite parts, are when we talk about the value of music blogs, because music blogs are losing value, but they still have value to this day. And while a Billboard article or a Rolling Stone or a Pitchfork article may not make or break your career today like it did 10 years ago, they're still relevant. They still further build your story, and Jason and I get into that much more in detail in the episode. Another thing we talk about is having success on SubmitHub. So the rejection rate on SubmitHub is 90%, but there are lots of tips and tricks that you can do to increase your chances of being accepted on the blog. And one of them being making sure that you're pitching correctly, the correct genre, I should say, to various blogs. So if you are writing an electronic song, it wouldn't make sense to pitch to an indie rock blog. And Jason gets more into detail on other techniques that you can use as well. We also discuss the value and the differences in value between a blog post and a social media post, because they both have different values, both have different techniques and different lengths of time, I guess you could say. One of them is more permanent and one of them is more temporary. Couple quick things before we jump in. I completely rebuilt my website. So if you're interested in learning more about me and reading the podcasts and the transcripts and everything for future podcast episodes, you can head over there, which the link is in the show notes. It's just lennonseahawk.com, and you can check out all my podcasts and everything that I'm up to these days. And I would also encourage you to sign up to my mailing list, which is on my website or in the show notes below. It helps me notify you when new episodes are live on the show. And if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, please fill out the guest request form below in the show notes, as well as it helps me continue to gather incredible guests like all of the people that I've had on the show before. And I'm always looking for incredible guests to be on the show. So if you or somebody you know would be a good guest, please fill it out and I will reach out. Lastly, I would really appreciate a 5-star rating and or review on Apple Podcasts, because it greatly helps the show get boosted and rated and helps build a community. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Jason Grishkoff. Jason, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time out of, I'm sure, your very hectic schedule to chat with me and share some insight on the music business and SubmitHub and your career and music and all that fun stuff.
Cool. It's mostly just hectic because of this lockdown and the fact that I got 2 kids at home. But
Oh my goodness. How's the lockdown going for you guys over there?
well, it's pretty intense. We're not allowed out of the house unless we're going grocery shopping. So that means no exercise, no dog walking, no nothing. And they've also banned all the sale of alcohol or cigarettes. And I'm not a smoker, but that's like a pretty brutal decision. And we're running out of alcohol in my house, so I'm feeling that one right now.
Yeah, especially with 2 kids, I'm sure.
Oh God, yeah.
So you guys can't even go out and do like dog walking or exercise or anything like that?
And we fortunately don't have a dog, but I'm a runner. I love running. I usually run every single day, and I haven't gone running in, what's it now, 19 days? So, whew, it's quite intense.
And you don't have a treadmill or anything in your house?
Oh, I wish I did now. In hindsight, right?
No.
It's one of those things you don't buy, but then, well, I mean, who would have expected? For us, it's a 5-week lockdown. So we've got 2 more weeks to go. And so I don't think anyone could have expected this, but I count my blessings that I work in a digital medium. And so this hasn't really impacted my work, except that I can't get much work done because of the kids. But it's pretty rough in South Africa when you consider that we have a huge population that lives hand to mouth. And anyway.
So you're the founder and CEO of SubmitHub and also in a blog called Indie Shuffle. Can you talk about what those 2 things are a little bit, just so we can get kind of a foundation?
Sure. Well, it'll be a lot easier to understand what SubmitHub is if you understand what Indie Shuffle is. So Indie Shuffle is a music blog that I started back in 2008-ish. And the idea behind it was that I would discover new music and write about it. And this was when torrenting was sort of at its peak. So we had access to any album you could ever want in a matter of seconds, all illegally, of course. And what that meant for me was I went through this massive sort of eye-opening phase of just discovering song after song after band, and I had to express it somehow. So that's when I started blogging. And lucky for me, I sort of caught a wave that was just growing at the time, right? I got on the wave at exactly the right time. And so my music blog, Indie Shuffle, grew steadily in its following. And by the time 2012, 2013 came around, we were seeing close to 5 million visits a month on our music blog. And so that was a huge success. We were making a lot of money from the advertising, at least we were supposed to, but we actually got gypped out of all that money. That's a different story. It was a great time for music discovery, right? If you were a musician and you got picked up by a blog like Indie Shuffle, and it wasn't just us, there were 50, 60 other influential music blogs of that size, it could have you booked to play Coachella the next year, right? So, I can think of a lot of bands that really rode the wave of music blogging to blow up. One of them is The Weeknd, who's currently sitting on top of all these charts. He got a huge amount of his initial trajectory through music blogs. He was doing covers and remixes and stuff like that. Lana Del Rey was another example who just blew up on the blogosphere. Churches, Two Door Cinema Club, Alt J, tons of bands, right? And so a lot of these were riding the wave of blogs. And what happened was that if you were a musician and you had a new song you were releasing, the first thing you would probably do is try to get it on a bunch of blogs so that you too could have similar success, right? And the follow-on effect of that was that as bloggers, we quickly became overwhelmed with how in demand we were. Not many of us were doing it full-time, but we were, a few of us were lucky enough to, in 2013, I quit my job at Google, of all places, because my blog was doing so well. And so I was going to take it full-time. And for most people, having 300 emails show up in your inbox every day saying, hey, can you check out my song, was not fun, right? And so music blogs in general quickly got swamped by this demand that they were facing, and they couldn't handle it anymore. Simultaneously, you had the rise of a couple streaming services, right? So in 2008, when I started blogging, SoundCloud wasn't a thing. Spotify wasn't a thing. But by 2013, Spotify was coming along and starting to gobble up all of the listeners from the music blogs, right? So why troll around a bunch of music blogs looking for new music when you can just have Spotify tell you what to listen to? Not to mention the fact that you're paying Spotify $10 a month, so you may as well use it, right? So music blogs started to see a little bit of a drop in their traffic, and that also meant that we started to see a big drop in our revenue. And the ability for me to do it full time was sort of quickly fading away. And I realized I had to do something else to keep alive the dream of being able to work for myself, right? Otherwise, I was going to have to go back to a desk job. So I set about trying to solve the problem of the 300 emails I was getting every day. And that is how SubmitHub was born. The idea was it was just a really simple form people could come and fill out if they wanted to send a song to Indie Shuffle. So I wanted, what's your artist name, song title, and a link to your music. And then when you put your link in, I'd been teaching myself how to code, and so I did some fancy stuff with code so that the links would all come through in a steady stream, and I could just click play there. Like I didn't have to open up a new window to listen on YouTube or listen on SoundCloud or do this or that. It was all right there in one window. I hit play, I listen. If I like it, I hit a thumb up, and if I don't like it, I hit a thumb down. And that was the really early essence of what SubmitHub was. It was just a super easy way for people to send me music. And for the first time in many years, I actually started paying attention to those 300 artists who were trying to reach me. So it marked a big shift in what we were covering on Indie Shuffle content-wise. We switched from being focused on the big names and the big acts to suddenly going, well, I don't actually have time to pay attention to them because I'm just listening to my SubmitHub submissions. And it's all these cool new artists I've never heard of. So that is kind of a very baseline background of how SubmitHub came to be. Is that a good answer? Does that work?
Yeah, that's a good answer because
cool.
prior to our conversation, I was doing a little research on you, and all this is kind of like getting pieced together. And I read about the kind of the ad thing that went on and how that was like you said, that's a whole nother story. So you were working at Google. What were you doing at Google?
I had a pretty unique job. I had to help Eric Schmidt and then Larry and Sergey eventually determine how much to pay their direct reports. So, yeah, it's like a job people don't know exists, right? It's called executive compensation. And so I basically would sit down with Eric and then sit down with Larry when he became CEO and say, okay, here's your, these are the 10 guys reporting to you. Here's what they've done over this time. Here's their performance reviews. We've collected everything. And here's our recommendation for how much you should pay them. And then he would go, well, this guy pissed me off last week, so let's take $5 million off of his, and this guy's going to be the next CEO, so let's give him an extra $30 million. And that was my job. So, yeah,
wow, that's an interesting position. I guess I've never heard of that.
It exists, and I mean, I don't want to. It was, and probably still is, very difficult to get a job at Google, but because I was in such a niche field. Like I'd been doing this before for a consulting company in DC. And because I was in such a niche field, I actually wasn't competing against that many people. Like they weren't, it wasn't like this genius from Harvard and someone who's got a Rhodes Scholarship and all of that. Like that wasn't my competition. I was competing against a bunch of sort of financy audit type people. And I had a music blog. And so when they compared me to all of these other people who were interviewing from the job, I'm just assuming I seemed a little cooler.
Yeah, because he's like, he runs a music blog. Like that's an interesting trait.
And I got really lucky on my interview day. So they flew me out to San Francisco. I was living in DC at the time, and I met with 10 people on the team doing all these interviews. It was hectic, but 3 of them were about to go to Coachella together. And so when they all found out I had a music blog and I knew all of the acts they were going to go see at Coachella, I think that was actually what ended up getting me the job. Because ultimately people hire people they want to work with.
You were doing some like consulting work to get that job prior?
Yeah, I was working for a firm in Washington, D.C. that basically helped justify executive salaries. So people would come along, say, hey, I'm the CEO of this company. I want to pay myself, $1 million a year. I know that's a crazy amount for a nonprofit and it's probably not real, but I want you guys to write a bunch of documents demonstrating about why it's warranted. And so our job would be basically to condone this massive amount of pay these guys were getting for running a nonprofit. It sucked. I hated it. I was actually being fired at the time that Google contacted me. I was on my way out, and it's because my boss was saying I was wasting too much time on this stupid music blog that will never go anywhere. And Google, so I hated the job. I was getting fired, and Google called me up and they said, hey, we've got a job in executive compensation. Is this interesting to you? And I was like, hell yeah, this is my life calling. I love executive compensation. So it's funny how the world works. I mean, the consulting firm was not right for me, but Google's a whole different environment, and it was cool. It was a lot of fun, and I got to interact with a lot of high profile people at Google. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you were working like directly under the founders. I mean, Eric Schmidt and Larry Page, and
yeah.
What did you learn from working with them? That's such one of the most prolific companies to ever cross the planet. Like, what did you learn from working under these people?
I had a really good manager who, well, he was very good for me. I think a lot of other people struggled with him, but for me, he was great. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I got from my time at Google was self-awareness. So this is, in the presence of these executives, or just the way you carry yourself around your team, or just the way you behave and interact. When I started there, I was 25, I think, and I wasn't very self-aware. So, one example is if there's a huge deadline or a project and you start getting stressed about it. I remember specifically a time at Halloween where I was working like the midnight oil and my teammates were just having fun and dressing up, and like they could tell it was boiling over and just agitating me and stressing me out, and I was getting snappy, and I wasn't aware of it at the time. And so, believe it or not, that's actually one of the things that really was the biggest takeaway from working there was the help and the coaching I got from the management about how to carry myself through it. So I think that self-awareness is what I will remember as being one of the best takeaways from it.
That's really important. I've kind of realized that in the last couple of years too, that I've been working. I'm like, the music industry is kind of a weird industry, but it's based on connections and friendships. And if you don't want to work with somebody who's very snappy and kind of short-witted and always has something to say, and it's very important on how you carry yourself and how you portray yourself, when you're meeting with these people and other artists and going to shows. And
yeah, I mean, I think we're all capable of it, and we all have our shitty days, and it's just about trying to capture that. So I still try to practice that every day, especially with the business I run. SubmitHub deals in rejection. It's a 90% rejection rate for most artists, and as the sort of face of SubmitHub, I'm dealing with a lot of disgruntled people. So not a lot. Surprisingly few, given how many people use it. But I would say that there are a lot of disgruntled people, and I don't blame them. And I think a lot of what I learned at Google is very important in trying to talk with those people, and not just become defensive about it. Which I'm sure some people will laugh at, because I'm all over the internet defending SubmitHub as well. But that's a different thing.
I mean, as you should. It's your baby, and you've basically coded the whole thing yourself, correct? Or did you build it yourself?
Yeah, I've built the entire thing myself, and I still am coding on it daily and pushing out new stuff daily. So what you see today is not what you'll see next week, and that's really where I like to spend a lot of my time. So most of my time is spent on customer support, which I still all do myself, and on the code. And the customer support is actually really helpful in driving what I am coding. So when people come with complaints or issues or suggestions or tips, and if it clicks and I go, that's great, we should do that, that's what you see on SubmitHub today. And I think that's probably my strongest asset as the business owner, is that I am also the coder. And I think the worst situation someone can be in if they run a tech company is to not have control of the tech stack. So if you are outsourcing to Bangladesh, or you've got a partner who's in charge of the tech and you do the other stuff, you're in dangerous territory, because it takes a lot longer to push changes out, and also you're dependent on someone else. So I think that's one of the coolest things about this business that I've got here, is that I can build it myself and turn it into what I want.
And I mean, I use SubmitHub for my blogs or my blog, and I love it. I've always, like, prior to joining SubmitHub, I was getting emails and emails because I'm a journalist outside of my own publication, and I started my own because of the limitations that I saw at other publications. And so I joined SubmitHub, and I'm just like, this solves every pitching problem that I've ever had. Like, it's a dashboard where I can log in. I can listen to the new stuff. I can leave feedback. I don't have to open a million windows. All the information is right there in front of me, whether they have a press release, they have artwork, they have press images, they have a story, they have other listening links, social media links. That's all right there in front of me. And I can just easily kind of click through and nope, yes. And then on top of it, make a little extra money on the side. I mean, it solves every issue that I've had with emails. And I basically turned away from emails. And when I get pitches through email now, I say, hey, you need to pitch to me on SubmitHub, just because it's where I go and that's where I see all my submissions. So congrats on creating a platform for that. I appreciate that. And I'm sure a lot of other bloggers and playlist curators and all that appreciate that as well. Do you intend to keep this all under your roof as well? Like, just you doing everything? Or are you going to, as you continue to expand, are you going to outsource a little bit more?
Oh, good question. And one of the harder ones as well, I think, for any business owner is relinquishing some of that control and handing it over to other people. So we are a team of 3 right now. I've got Hinku, who helps me on all of the finances and taxes and legal stuff. And then Dylan, who you probably interacted with when you applied to join SubmitHub. He handles all of the applications, and he's also like the #1 sheriff. So he's keeping track of everyone on SubmitHub from both sides, artists and curators, and he's looking for bad behavior and making sure that doesn't go unchecked. So he spends a lot of time working on that, and we are planning to bring in 1, maybe 2 people reporting to Dylan so that we can put more emphasis on, I mean, there's nearly 1,200 curators on here now, and it's growing really quickly. It's growing too quickly for us to be able to handle. I think Dylan's getting 50 to 60 applications per day now. And so we're planning on hiring, well, we have already hired people. They're starting next month, and they're going to help us with the policing and application process of bringing on new curators and making sure that what they offer is of value to artists. So yeah, I think, and what that will allow me to do is to just code more, which is really where I'm happiest. And so if I enjoy the customer support interaction, and I don't mind that, but there's a lot of other stuff that's going on that people don't see. A lot of engagements that we're having to work on, and that is something that I'm looking forward to freeing up so that I can focus more on code, which is where I think I add most of the value.
SubmitHub is growing very quickly, and that's incredible because it's definitely emerging as one of those platforms. It's just like, I don't see why any blog or any blogger would not want to be on the platform, just because it's so easy to use. But the kind of the art of submission and pitching is a little bit different on the platform versus, just sending a typical email. Like, it's not as personalized as a conversation as it is. So can you describe how, like, the differences between pitching somebody via email and pitching somebody over SubmitHub is, and how the discrepancies are a little different?
Sure. Okay. Gosh, they are. I mean, so they come from the same origin. SubmitHub is built on the fact that bloggers were overwhelmed by emails and artists weren't getting responses to their emails. So it's sort of a two-pronged attack there. And so I think today, if you email a curator, you might actually have a better chance of getting a response than you would have 5 years ago. And that's because they're not overwhelmed by emails, because they're on SubmitHub. So people, in essence, have given up on emails because it's shouting into an echo chamber and you don't get much response. And I think anyone who has run an email campaign in 2020 probably ended up getting 100 responses telling them to go to SubmitHub. So how does SubmitHub make it a bit different? From an artist's perspective, it allows you a guaranteed opportunity to have your song considered. 90% of the time, it's going to not be a good fit for that curator. And that's one of the hardest parts for any artist using SubmitHub is that rejection that comes through. But the big difference is that in the past, you would have sent out 500 emails and gotten almost no responses. And if you use SubmitHub to contact 50 curators, you're going to probably hear back from 45 of them within 48 hours. And then the real difference here, I think, back with emails, everyone was trying to be friends with the curators. So this started to get to me when I was running Indie Shuffle, and it sounds wrong because okay, it's not wrong. Everyone's trying to be friends with you, but they're not trying to be friends with you because they want to be friends with you. They're trying to be friends with you because they want you to cover their music, right? And at the extreme, that meant that I would have publicists taking me out for beers, and we would have a great time, and it was awesome, but now you suddenly felt indebted to them. And that's the personal touch that a lot of people claim to miss from email. But I think the reality of it for most artists is that that personal connection never actually happened, and that the bloggers, even though they may have started out with good intentions and actually built some early relationships that were valuable, they quickly became overwhelmed and just started ignoring everyone. And so the difference is that on SubmitHub, there's that first filter, right? A blog listens to the song, and if they like it, then they choose to open up the relationship with the artist. And once you've been approved by a curator, there's a chat that opens directly with them, and you can communicate that way. And I've had lots of great conversations myself with artists that we've approved for coverage on Indie Shuffle. And then, they'll come back down the line a year later and say, hey, by the way, I released a new song. I've sent it to you through SubmitHub. Keep an eye out for it. And that's actually a strategy I strongly recommend that artists use. If they're going back to SubmitHub and they've had approvals in the past, don't just go into the chat and spam your link to the curator and be like, yo, I released a new song, check it out. A really good strategy is to say, I sent it to you as a SubmitHub submission. I respected your process. It's in there. Keep an eye out for it. So I guess, long story short, there is still a personal element to it. And I would actually argue that for most artists, it allows more personal connections than it used to. And definitely for blogs, it's a much easier way to pick and choose who you want to connect with.
I agree. I've used SubmitHub as an artist, and I have artists that I'm working with use SubmitHub, and I use it as a blogger myself to run my own blog. And I've had both sides. People send me a message and say, hey, I submitted a track to you. I've got another song coming up. How do you want me to submit it? Obviously submit it through SubmitHub. And then I've had others where they just send me a SoundCloud link through the previous message on a previous submission. Like, hey, here's a link to my new song. I'm like, that's not how I want it submitted through the submissions. It's like, there's a process here. It's like, try not to weave around it and get around it. But so I want to talk about, the art of submission is very kind of unique, but the writing, music blogs just don't have the value that they used to have, 10 years ago. Like Pitchfork review could make or break your career. So how do you feel that, being that submissions are going quickly and everybody wants things so quickly these days, and turnaround is instant, everybody's releasing music so quickly, do you think that the value of music blogs is going up or it's going down? Is it translating more into more value on playlists or social media like TikTok, which is also Instagram, which is also what SubmitHub is doing to submit to social media influencers? How are you seeing that kind of translate?
I think it used to be a lot easier to break out through music blogs 5-10 years ago. And I think today, there's been this huge proliferation of curators, music blogs, playlisters, YouTube channels, SoundCloud. And there are just so many musicians that I think SubmitHub's made it easier to get attention and harder to have major success. So it's easier to get attention because you're guaranteed someone's going to listen to your song, give it the time of day, and possibly share it, right? But because we're so spoiled with choice on the internet and everyone is so fragmented and just the options are limitless, you end up with things being a lot less focused. So Hype Machine 5-10 years ago was it, right? And if you hit number one on Hype Machine, that was going to blow up your career. And that was the collective power of blogs. It all actually funneled through Hype Machine, and we really owe a lot of credit to them for that. Something like that doesn't exist today. It doesn't exist for the blogs. It doesn't exist for for playlists. It doesn't exist for influencers, etc. I mean, I've got some variation of that on SubmitHub with the popular chart, but there's no way I would compare that influence to what Hype Machine's charts used to be, right? So I can say, yeah, blogs have waned in their influence and ability to break out an artist, but I actually don't think anything has necessarily replaced them. Everyone talks about, Spotify playlists and getting on the editorial playlist and doing all of that, but again, even if you do have that success of getting on a playlist, picking up 50,000 monthly listeners, as soon as you get dropped from that playlist, you're going to lose all of those listeners. And at the end of the day, you're not breaking out in the same way that a lot of these acts used to break out on blogs in 2010, 2011, 2012. I'm thinking of acts like Church's Two Door Cinema Club, The Weeknd, etc. And these are the guys who just absolutely blew up through music blogging, and you see very little of that these days through the industry. I think what you see instead is it's much easier for the average artist, for a small act, to gain some traction and some credibility. And I think this is where the power of SubmitHub lies in 2020. It's not gonna blow you up. Even if you hit #1 on the popular chart and you get 100 approvals, odds are you're not going to blow up. It's happened for a couple acts. There've definitely been some artists who've gone through SubmitHub and it was kind of the flame that lit the fire, right? One popping into my head is Men I Trust, which is a band I quite like. And they were there very early on in SubmitHub's career, I suppose, SubmitHub's existence. And they were constantly hitting the top of the charts. They're sitting at 1.3 million monthly listeners right now on Spotify, which I would say is pretty big. But I also think that pales in comparison to what blogs were able to do for a select few acts 10 years ago. So, long story short, I just don't think it exists anymore on the internet. There is no more Hype Machine, and this sort of democratization and vast reach that exists has meant that far more artists get a piece of the pie, but no one's walking away with like a whole big slice. Does that make sense?
Do you think it's because like the streaming services have made it even more accessible to listen to this music?
For sure, right? I mean, they've got so many listeners on there, but at the same time, you're spoiled for choice, right? And so 20 years ago, 30 years ago, commercial radio would decide what was mainstream and what wasn't. 10 years ago, on some scale, Hype Machine was deciding that for big acts like Coachella and Bonnaroo and all of that.
I know Hype Machine, but was Hype Machine, is it more like specific to electronic music, or what are the genres that kind of...
Hype Machine was an aggregator of music blogs. So it just followed about 1,000 music blogs, and it just aggregated what they did. So it would say 10 blogs published this song in the last week. And then they had a chart of which songs were being blogged the most. And Hype Machine's list basically became the de facto A&R go-to of any Friday morning meeting. So at the labels, they would sit down and they would say, okay, what's in the top 10 of Hype Machine? How do we contact them? And you would see a lot of the acts who got in there would end up getting booked for all of the major festivals, which is probably one of the largest sources of their revenue. And it had a really strong influence in sort of an indie hip-hop and electronic scene. So I'm thinking of Chance the Rapper, I'm thinking of Two Door Cinema Club, I'm thinking of Odessa, even Skrillex, acts like that, who really just blew up and rode this train of blogging. So it was a younger set of genres because bloggers, by and large, were in that sort of 18 to 40 demographic. So things like jazz weren't so hot. A lot of the Latin music wasn't really there because 10 years ago, their market wasn't digitally as developed as parts of Europe and America were. So it was skewed towards indie hip-hop and electronic music at the time. But for me, I think that was the last time that there really was that much power. Today, the closest thing you can get in the digital sense is getting into something like Spotify's Rap Caviar, right? It's a playlist with 15 million followers. But almost no one's going to do that, right? And no matter how much coverage you pick up from blogs and other playlists, the artists showing up in Rap Caviar are on a whole different level. Probably have a whole bunch of different connections going on. There's probably some shady payola stuff going on, maybe holidays to Miami, who knows. But gosh, I would say today it is way harder to blow up in general.
I agree. And the thing, I mean, I've talked about this and previous guests have talked about this on the podcast before, and about playlisting and how it's important in your career because it can build a little bit of sense of awareness, and like it's something to throw in your press release, even though it's really not that. I don't really care if you made it into Rap Caviar or not. I want to know how good the song is. And so many people focus on getting in these massive playlists, but once they get removed, like they're nobody. They go right back to where they used to be, because the people that are following the playlist are fans of the playlist, not fans of the artist in the playlist. So the conversion rate is very low on those playlists. And that's something that I think Hypem did super well, and it kind of took the blogs, aggregated them, and put everything into kind of a dashboard, and then everything kind of moved over to streaming. So, but I get so tired of artists that are so focused on, getting into these big playlists, and then they get, 1 million streams and they get a nice paycheck. But at the end of the day, it's like, once you're removed from that playlist, what do you do? Like, how do you convert these people into fans to actually follow your music and support your career? Also, like, I'm curious to get your insight on this, because you probably have a lot more experience than me in this. Music blogs are clearly not completely gone. Like, Billboard is still existent. They're still writing about music. Rolling Stone is still writing about music. Pitchfork is still writing about music. These things help with, when people are searching and want to learn more about you, and it kind of solidifies your story. Would you agree to that?
I would, yes. And it's also very useful to take the snippets that you get from blogs. Heck, you can even take the feedback that you get on SubmitHub when you get declined, because often within that there'll be some positive notes, right? I would say like, wow, I really love the guitar solo on this, but it just felt too classic rock. If you're an artist, you could say, okay, cool. Well, I know it's a pass, but at the beginning you said you really loved the guitar solo. So I'm going to take that snippet and I'm going to create some nice little artwork, put that word up there, and I'll put credit to Indie Shuffle, put it in quotes, and boom, I just have an Instagram post I can do for myself. So in a way, you can turn a lemon into lemon juice. I don't know, but I've seen some very clever people do that, because you're actually taking what you're trying to do is craft your story and create that and keep your, I don't know if you're familiar with what's Kevin Kelly, I think is his name, who does this like 1,000 True Fans thing. But the idea is that 1,000 true fans is all an artist of any medium really needs in order to do it full time. Because 1,000 true fans are going to support your craft, they're going to buy your music, they're going to be out there at your shows, they're going to do that. And so what you're trying to focus on is building those 1,000 true fans and keeping them engaged. So blog content, even blog rejections, is a lot of value to you when you're trying to communicate with your fans and share your story and your development, etc.
That's interesting. I never thought of artists doing that and taking like a rejection and just saying, I really like a guitar solo, and then turning that into an Instagram post, or even putting it in your press release, just saying, hey, I really like the guitar solo in this piece, by Billboard or whoever it was what it was. But yeah, I was talking to a friend about that the other day, and she's like, music blogs, are they even that legit anymore? Like, do people use them? Yeah, people still read them. Like, I get traffic to my blog. It's not a lot, but I get traffic. EDM.com, a publication that I write for, they get a lot of traffic. So it's like they do get traffic generated probably from the news sources that they get and write about. But we also do a lot of like writing about music. And when people are starting to search those things, they're getting credited, and then there's these stories are getting pulled up, and then people can read about them and learn about them. Like, if you search my name on Wikipedia, I see that my articles that I've written for Noise Porn and Earmilk and EDM.com and Magnetic Magazine, they're all credited in a lot of these artists' bios. And I'm like, that's cool. So, these things are useful. Like, they are helping solidify your story as an artist.
At the end of the day, even if they've only got 10 people visiting their blog, there's still some value in someone taking time to think about, listen to, and write about your song. And there can be some validation behind that as an artist. I guess it's kind of ironic I'm talking about something like that when SubmitHub is 90% rejection, but there is like a silver lining there that can be extracted from it, and not everyone's going to get it. Not everyone has a future in the music industry, but I think if you go into it trying to build a future in the music industry and wanting to do it full time, you've probably got your expectations in the wrong place anyway. It's so difficult out there. So I think many of the artists using SubmitHub do it as a hobby, and they're doing it on the side, which is actually, you might have noticed, the website is incredibly busy right now with submissions, and I think that's because this lockdown has allowed a lot of people to spend a bit more time on their hobby and their passion. And that sense of validation of a blog picking up and writing about your music can actually make a big difference in wanting to keep doing it and writing the next song. So it's not always just about the direct equation of how many listeners did that blog post bring me. There's so much more that can be extracted from it, I think.
When artists are submitting on SubmitHub, and I mean, I can talk to the things that I like to see in a submission, whether it be an email pitch or a SubmitHub pitch. Do you have some tips and tricks on success in pitching on SubmitHub and using the platform to maybe get a higher acceptance rate?
I definitely do. So first tip is, if you're new to SubmitHub, don't go all in at once. Test the waters, put your toe in, practice a little bit, because I think it takes a little bit of getting used to. For a first-time user, it can be overwhelming how much information there is and how many choices there are. And so that's sort of my first tip. The second one is that it makes a huge difference if you actually pay attention to who you're sending to. If you just go in there and select all of the options available to you, you're going to end up closer towards that average, which is a 90% rejection. But if you spend some time actually going through, it's sort of useful to think of SubmitHub as a directory of curators, and there's 1,200 of them on there. And so you've got this directory, and we provide you with as much information as we can about each of them. We give you examples of what they've shared recently. We show you what their feedback looks like, what their approval rates are, how many monthly plays they get on Spotify, what their blog posts look like, are they listed on Hype Machine, all sorts of stuff. It's like an overwhelming amount of information that's present there for you to see. And I think when you're looking at that, one of the things that's very important is to actually stop, slow down, spend time, and think about who you're sending to. And usually one of the most important things you can look at is what I call the genre match score. So this is step one, you upload your song, and when you get to this big directory of 1,200 curators, the very first thing you need to do is indicate what genre your song is. And once you've done that, you'll see the list narrow down, and every curator gets a genre match score accompanied to them. And as you've seen, as a curator, you can indicate whatever genres you're interested in, right? We don't limit you as to what you can choose. We do limit you as to how many you can choose, but at the end of the day, it's your choice what genres you want to listen to. We're not going to force you into a silo. But we can provide artists with information about how often someone is going to approve a hip-hop song. So if you choose hip-hop and Indie Shuffle pops up and you're going, why the hell would a blog named Indie Shuffle pop up for hip-hop? And you see that our genre match score is a 1 out of 5, it means, hey, we want hip-hop, but actually you're not going to have that much luck if you send it to us. So that genre match score can be really helpful in sort of driving who you send to. And just paying attention to that alone is going to dramatically increase your chances of being approved. Ultimately, it all comes down to the quality of your song. But yeah, if you go and you send a hip-hop song to a bunch of blogs that tend to not approve very much hip-hop, maybe they prefer indie rock or they prefer jazz or whatever, you're going to be decreasing your chances significantly. And all of that info is there. It'll tell you, like, Indie Shuffle's favorite genres are down-tempo, lo-fi house, instrumental, and indie rock is actually one of our least favorite. And I think that's just because we get so much of it. But then you can see, you choose your genre and you can sort of get a taste of what each blog actually likes. And you can ask yourself, does my music fit that profile? And if it doesn't, maybe you're better off using your credits with a different outlet.
Yeah, that's one thing I get. I mean, I run an electronic music blog, so I write about everything, but I run the blog myself, so I see I have a very unique taste. Now, if I had more writers that I could expand to and say, I have somebody that really likes future house, or somebody that really likes future bass, or somebody that really likes hip hop, I could expand a little bit. But me personally, I only write about music that I enjoy and am like I could groove to, because otherwise it's harder for me to get into and like actually support the post. Like if I'm really feeling the song, I'm like, hell yeah, I want to share this with everybody. I want to talk about this. And I like the feature when you're talking about that. I like the feature that it says based on recent approval, they prefer, my genres are dubstep, EDM, future house, progressive house, and trap, which are spot on. Those are the genres that I primarily listen to and I like. So it's so important to understand who you're submitting to before you're submitting. Like clearly submitting a classic rock song or an indie rock song, to me, it's not going to get approved because I don't write about that.
And hopefully you'll get filtered out of the list because you haven't even said you like those genres, right?
Yes, I have unchecked. I went through and really fine-tuned. Like I kind of opened it when I first started. I had it open to more genres, and then as people submitted, I'm like, okay, they marked it as like down-tempo. I'm like, I'm not really feeling the down-tempo because everybody has a different definition of each genre, and not
That's true, yeah.
So everybody feels like they're trying to like push the boundaries of down-tempo, and they're starting to like branch out. So I'm like, I just started kind of weeding them out, and now I've kind of hyper-focused it on like so people can really see like what I'm listening to improve your odds of being accepted.
And you're probably getting a lot more music that is aligned with what you're doing.
Yes.
So your perspective is interesting as an artist to keep in mind when choosing who to submit to, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Just really like what's on my SubmitHub is very reflective of what I'm accepting and what I'm listening to. And I love the feature on the platform that, you can scroll through the page and it's like a portfolio you can about, and you can even see like the tracks that I've recently shared and then listen to them and see like, oh, wow, this is the type of music that he's listening to. And you can see a lot of it's heavier stuff, and some of it's a little bit more trappy, heavy dubstep. Like you can see exactly what I'm submitting to. So submitting an ambient like Phil Collins track is probably not going to get probably not going to get accepted. So that's great. And I think so many people are out there like looking for like, oh, how do I see success on SubmitHub, and how do I get more accepted and acceptance and covered and all this stuff. And it's really hyper targeting who you're submitting to. Like don't submit dubstep to a country blog, and don't submit country to an electronic blog. It's just those types of things to keep in mind when you're submitting, and even when you're pitching via email. SubmitHub now allows you to pitch to Instagram, social media influencers, let's call them, Instagram and TikTok influencers. How does that, like, what is that process? Like, that's kind of a new thing to me. Like, it's kind of a newer thing, like pitching to social media influencers versus a music blogger. Like, yeah, they're influencers, but it's completely different. And I just had a TikTok expert on my podcast this week. So I'm curious to hear how the submission process works even more from you now that SubmitHub has that option.
And I was looking at that podcast and I haven't listened yet, but I do want to listen to it. I think one of the primary aha moments for me with the Instagram influencer stuff, people have been asking me to add it to SubmitHub for a couple of years now, and I've always pushed back because from my experience as someone who doesn't even use Instagram, the last time I used Instagram properly was back in 2014, 2015, and it was just images. You couldn't message people. You couldn't do any of that.
Wow.
And I know, right? I'm old.
I was going to say, I've never heard of anybody that's not on Instagram or doesn't use it.
No. I just before this podcast, I actually did my first ever Instagram live stream with the guitarist of Smash Mouth.
Oh,
which
cool.
was kind of cool.
Cool. Did
a Q&A. And I didn't know Instagram could do that, but it worked. So when I learned that music stickers, which get attached to stories, are monetized, it sort of was a bit of a, oh shit, okay, this could be valuable to artists moment. So if you are going through your distributor, say it's DistroKid, for example, you can choose to make sure that your music gets distributed to Facebook and Instagram. And when you do that, it means that if your song gets attached to a story as a sticker, you're going to get paid. And I don't know how much you're going to get paid. I haven't really seen much data about that, probably because it's so new. But in principle, you're actually going to monetize those streams. And then I started to think, well, most of these Spotify playlisters that we're signing up to SubmitHub are only generating a couple thousand streams per month on a song. And some of them are only generating a couple hundred streams per month on a song. Indie Shuffle's Spotify playlist, even though that's not our forte, I think we've got 3,000 followers. And if your song gets into one of our playlists, you'll probably pick up 200 or 300 listens. And on the flip side, a lot of these Instagram influencers in sort of a micro influencer range. So these are people who've got anywhere between 10,000 and 100,000 followers. When they publish a story, they're going to get 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 story views on that, right? And if your sticker is attached to that, that's potentially 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 plays of your song, and you're potentially going to get paid for that. So that's one driving factor behind why I think there is an opportunity with influencers and music. The second one, of course, is that they've got an audience, right? And that audience trusts their taste and their opinion and looks to them. So there's also the possibility that sharing music through that audience is going to broaden your horizons. To be completely honest and transparent, I don't know if it's working. I don't know. We have seen that there are different ways that influencers share. Some of them are more effective than others. You can share directly from Spotify to Instagram, and it comes up with a cover artwork and a link. That doesn't pay because it's not a music sticker.
So to get paid, so from my understanding, you have to have a sticker from Instagram in order for it to get paid royalties.
Exactly, and so what we're now doing, and this is actually going to be one of the jobs of the employee who's starting next month, is to help take. I think we've got 130 influencers now that we've signed up over the course of the year, to look at the way that they're sharing and to try identify the methods that seem to have the biggest impact for artists. And on the flip side, identify the least effective ways of sharing and then push them towards the more effective one. So if we see someone who is approving 20 songs a day and sharing 20 stories back to back, that's going to be a bad behavior because their followers are just not going to bother with 20 stories back to back of music. But if we see an influencer who has taken a video, presumably from inside their house right now, because that's all they can do, but they've stuck your song on there as the background music and it's got great context to it and it's part of the whole story, that's going to be a really great share. We've also seen, there's another influencer I saw who does sort of these votes. So he'd be like, cool, here are the 5 best songs I found this week. Listen to them here and vote on the one that you think is the best. So there's a lot of opportunity there with these curators. And I think, look, I'm a huge skeptic when it comes to independent Spotify playlists at this point. I don't know who to trust, what to trust, and I don't know whether Spotify cares about them. Everything I've seen Spotify do implies that they actually would prefer they just weren't on Spotify. And so from my perspective, it's sort of looking at, okay, what's the next frontier as a musician to get out there? And we haven't dived into TikTok as much yet for 2 reasons. I should listen to the other podcast you did to see if I'm on the right track here. But reason number 1 is that they don't actually have as much coverage of the music through the distributors right now. So most of the songs that come through SubmitHub are not going to be on TikTok, so it would be difficult to share them. And the second reason is because TikTok's content is generally a lot harder and more involved to create than an Instagram share. So what we see with a lot of the TikTokers is that they'll lip sync to a song or do a video or dress up, or it's video content, right? And I'm not sure that SubmitHub's model is going to work very well for them. And we've seen it with a couple of them where Instagram and TikTok are built on a payola mentality. So you're basically paying for promo. And if you want to get featured on their Instagram, a lot of them will go, oh, it's like $500. Or, TikTok will say, cool, it's $1,000 to feature on here. And as you full well know, that's not kosher in the music industry. But it's it's difficult to reconcile because at the end of the day, they're creating content and doing promo. So I've got some ideas for how to tackle the TikTok side with consideration for the fact that it's much more involved, and it will sort of step into a bit of a payola gray area. So in essence, my current thinking is that it would have to be some sort of marketplace where you pitch your song to a TikToker and they are upfront about their price. It says, hey, if we like your song, this is what you'll get and this is what it will cost. And that's kind of it.
From what I learned in the TikTok episode, which I thought was very interesting, was there's two things that were somewhat concerning to me. Is number one, there is no like TikTok analytics dashboards. You can't really see who's clicking through the conversions and how effective the campaign is. You just go by, how many people commented or liked and saw the post based on impressions. That was kind of alarming to me. Whereas a Facebook campaign, you can actually Facebook tracks them and it shows them all the way to the purchase process. So you can actually see how effective the campaign was. Whereas throwing $500 at a TikTok influencer with say 300,000 followers, if they only got 100 comments and maybe 5,000 likes, was that really an effective campaign? Was it worth $500? There's really no metric to measure that success. And number two is there are distributors that are now getting acquainted and getting on board with distributing to TikTok. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look at the list again to see which ones are. But basically, if it's not distributed to TikTok through one of your distributors, they have no way of tracking it. So let's say you send your song to an influencer and they just play it on their phone or they play it on the radio, like on a TV or a soundbar or something, and they just record them dancing to it. There's no way your distributor can track that and see they're actually using your song. I'm not sure if there's I don't believe there's a content ID system in place for TikTok. But there's no way to then collect that royalty for that play. So it's you're paying $500, but there's really there's no way to measure your success, and B, there's no way to actually make money back because it's been distributed through your distributor, which I thought was very interesting.
I think those are both probably the main drivers of why I don't think it's ready for a SubmitHub model yet. But Instagram I think is a bit more ready. And the pricing model of SubmitHub works easier on Instagram because it's less involved from the influencer side, right? You're just sitting there. You could be in your pajamas sharing it. You don't actually have to get on camera and interact with the audience. So we'll see. I mean, a multi-pronged approach is still good. I'm still a big fan of going for RGB, the really good bloggers category, and anyone listed on Hype Machine. There are definitely some quality Spotify playlisters on SubmitHub that are worth sending to. But I guess, as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, these days it's like throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks. It's not easy. It's never been easier to find 20 or 30 or 50 people to listen to your music, but it's never been harder to become the next big thing.
So when submitting to these social influencers, what is it like? Do they just submit the track? Or are they submitting a story?
So they're listed on SubmitHub in a similar way to what we are as blogs, right? And so when you go through this list, you can submithub.com/blogs, you can filter it to show the influencers. And one pretty cool feature is that it will show you screenshots of what they've recently shared on their Instagram. So you can actually get a taste for exactly what that content will look like when they do share it. So it's kind of like the same way you can go visit one of the blogs and see what they're writing about to get an idea of what it would look like if you got approved. You can do that same thing here.
Okay.
So you can get an idea, is this person just doing the Spotify screenshot share? Probably not the best way to get your content heard. But are they doing the music stickers attached to stories and it looks good and it's quality and they're not packing them back to back? Then it's a strong signal. And as with everything, that's all right here for you to see.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned earlier a few minutes ago about social media influencers, like obviously like going in and kind of policing them, and they can have say 10 submissions and they just accept them all and then they just do back to back to back to back stories. That's obviously not effective and not money well spent or time well spent. So how are you working like the limitations on how like, oh, you can only accept one and you have to publish this post first, and like how's that kind of being policed to make sure that that doesn't happen?
So I think the problem you're getting to is not just specific to Instagram influencers, but my answer has always been to not force people's hands. So I'm reluctant to go in and tell someone you can't approve this many songs. What I prefer to do is try to indicate in the profile that it's not a good idea to send to them. So I'll give them a low quality score or a low reach score or that type of stuff. So it flows through to their profile and you'll see it in the notes. I'm not entirely sure, like I've discussed this with Dylan, what we're going to do in the influencer space if we are going to limit it. And we probably will try and come up with some sort of limitation to how many stories you can share back to back, right? Because that does get a little bit messy. But I don't want to come in here and tell someone you have a quota. Like you have to approve this many songs, but you can't approve fewer than that. Like it just feels wrong. And there are outlets on SubmitHub that approve 75% of their submissions, and it's not surprising they've got the lowest influence scores, and they tend to have low quality scores. And I warn submitters that they might want to steer clear of said curator because it's a bit of a waste of a time. But they still get tons of submissions, and I think people are of the mindset that maybe it doesn't matter how small the reach is or what it is. They just want the approvals because you never know.
Yeah. That's true. I'm seeing on my page that I've got to up my feedback a little bit. I've been a little busy lately, so I've let it slip a little bit, but I got to get it back up. But so social posts are more temporary, can be more temporary, especially if like it's an Instagram story.
Way more, yeah.
So like people spending a lot more money. I don't know how much they're spending and what like the ratios for that are, but like an Instagram story is only 24 hours or something like that.
It is, yeah.
And versus a blog post, which is virtually forever, unless the blog goes under, and Google can archive that and index it and does its thing. So the value of a blog post, I feel like in this case, is worth a little bit more. Obviously, depending on how good the review is and all that stuff, but. That's kind of an interesting thing. And then at some point it's like, okay, well, how are we going to turn social media posts into being just as valuable as, a blog post? But, if you can drive a lot of traffic to somebody's page or somebody's song through a social media post versus a blog post, then the value it's an interesting conversion and how it's going to work.
I'm fully there with you. I mean, part of the logic is that if not many people are reading blogs, you got to wonder where they are, and we know they're all on Instagram. So that's kind of where this is flowing, and then it's just a question of, okay, but how does that translate through for an artist? Is it worth it or is it not? And I would say in 6 months it will be more worth it than it is now, because we're gonna actively coach these guys and try to push them towards sharing the content that is more valuable.
How can listeners keep up with you and SubmitHub and Indie Shuffle and all the work the amazing work you're doing?
Oh, geez. I'm really active on SubmitHub itself. So we got these chat rooms, and anyone can chat with me if they want. I also respond to all of my emails. So if anyone ever wants to reach out, I'm easily accessible and ready to converse.
Great. That's always super helpful. Yeah, and that's why I was so excited to have you on the show, is because I see you in the SubmitHub, chat box, and you're always helping people and assisting people. So that's why I was like honored to have you on the show.
I mean, I think you got a cool podcast, so I was pretty stoked to be on it too.
Thank you so much, Jason. Have a great rest of the weekend and take care of yourself out there.
Cool. Thanks, Lennon. You too, man.